With the boys' TV universe heading toward its endgame, I think it's fair to say that interest in this franchise is at an all-time high right now. However, did you know that the Supes in the comics it is based on differ wildly from their TV counterparts in several aspects? In the comics before The Seven, Vought attempted to create several other superhero groups, one of which actually existed alongside The Seven, as the second most popular group of Supes. They were called Payback, and the group was comprised of several legacy heroes that Vought had nurtured from its early days, while they were still perfecting their Compound V. To the public eye, many Payback identities were legacy mantles that Vought publicly connected back to older wartime heroes like the Avenging Squad. However, as you shall find out in this video, the truth is never that simple. In today's video, I will be exploring all the original superheroes who were a part of the Avenging Squad and Payback. Not only that, I will be uncovering the secret that Vought has kept from the public regarding the true origins of their Supes, as we find out the truth that this corrupt organization would rather be kept buried. I think by the end of the video, you will see the levels of deception behind these superheroes and their creation, along with just how diabolical they really are. So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? Era 1, The Avenging Squad, World War II roster, Soldier Boy, World War II original. Just to be clear from the start, this is technically not the Soldier Boy you see Jensen Ackles play in the TV show. In fact, in the comics, this is the first version of Soldier Boy that the Vought Corporation creates. Yep, I was quite confused initially as well, since my introduction to this franchise was from the TV show, which will also be the case, I guess, for many of you too. You see, back in the day, during World War II, Vought had already begun cooking up their superheroes thanks to their breakthrough drug, Compound V. We learn the origins of this Soldier Boy through the words of Greg Mallory, who was replaced by Grace Mallory in the TV show. Greg reveals that during the peak years of the war, one day a group of costumed individuals arrive at an Allied camp near the German front during the Battle of the Bulge. I love how Mallory refers to them as costume freaks, because he really wasn't that far off the mark, in my opinion. These early Supes who called themselves the Avenging Squad were a bunch of juiced-up kids who were tripping on their own power and had no business being deployed for war. Their leader was Soldier Boy, an arrogant and insubordinate fool whose actions eventually jeopardize his own side and lead to the death of many soldiers and the rest of his team. I think it's amusing that even back in the day, Supes were as arrogant and out of touch as their modern-day counterparts. I guess some things never change, huh? Well, we aren't really given any detail about who the man behind the mask is, or any sort of background history. All that we are told is that him and his buddies from the Avenging Squad were part of the first attempt of Vought to incorporate Supes into the American Army. During the Battle of the Bulge, he authorized a scouting party of flying Supes from his team to do reconnaissance on the German camp. Having done so without understanding proper war tactics, all that it managed to do was to lead the Germans back to the American base, where everyone was slaughtered in an ambush. Soldier Boy himself was grievously wounded and found by Mallory, who finished the wannabe hero with a grenade. This Soldier Boy was a complete moron, but I'd give him props for at least being a patriot and enthusiastic about his job, even though it did result in his eventual inglorious death. Eagle the Archer, original. I'd like you to imagine what would happen if you crossed Angel from the X-Men with Hawkeye. Well, that's at least what Eagle the Archer was kinda supposed to be. He was a masked Supe who had the ability to fly using the two wings on his back, and his weapon of choice was a bow. I mean, personally, I would much rather use guns, or at least trick arrows, but hey, that's just me. Eagle the Archer, just like Soldier Boy, belonged to the first superhero group that Vought ever created called the Avenging Squad, in a bid to incorporate their product into the military. If you think the first Soldier Boy has less material on him, let me tell you, the background of Eagle the Archer before he became a Supe is even more obscure. He turns up at the same American base prior to the Battle of the Bulge, alongside Soldier Boy and the rest of his team to aid and assist the American Army stationed there. Eagle was actually one of the flyers that Soldier Boy ordered to scout the German base. As I mentioned earlier, he was spotted by the enemy and tracked back to the base, which led to the eventual massacre that happened there. Once the ambush was sprung by the Germans and the bodies began to hit the floor, instead of acting like the American hero that he was supposed to be, Eagle instead takes to the sky to escape the onslaught. What happens next is peak irony in my opinion, because the superhero that was supposed to dominate the sky is cut down by the propellers of a friendly plane, and his shredded remains are then crushed by a tank. I'll say this much about him, Eagle the Archer was a better soldier than Soldier Boy, because at least he knew how to follow orders. Crimson Countess Original. By now, I think you probably understand that the original Vought heroes were little more than chumps on steroids that gave them powers. The trend continues with Crimson Countess, who once again is another obscure side character, not to be mistaken with her more famous successor who bore the same name later. The origin story that Vought cooked up for her with the aid of their comic book subsidiary Victory Comics was that Crimson Countess was a trans-dimensional witch. Apparently she was immortal, and following her role in the Second World War, she had gone back to her home dimension. I guess you already know that this was far from the truth, because she was part of that ill-fated squad that followed the idiotic Soldier Boy's lead and got killed by the Germans in an ambush. Which I believe goes to show how over their heads the Crimson Countess and her party members were, despite having their superpowers. I mean, just take Crimson Countess for example. Vaught's later Crimson Countess is associated with microwave-style energy blasts, but the original wartime Countess is too briefly shown to safely confirm every letter power as hers, yet here she is falling to an ordinary soldier's bullet. I want you to guess which superhero do you think is her character inspired by, and tell me in the comments. The Buzzer. Honestly, I tried my best to find as much stuff as I could for the Buzzer, but there really isn't much out there. For some reason, Vought decided to dress up the poor guy as a fly, and even called him Buzzer. I mean, imagine becoming a superhuman only to then be called a fly and even be made to dress like one. He was one of the flyers alongside Eagle the Archer who were spotted and followed by the Germans. To make things even more depressing, he doesn't even get a highlight-worthy death, as he dies just like the numerous other side characters in that scene. My guess is that the people behind the comics tried to make him like their version of Ant-Man and the Wasp, but unlike them, he just ended up getting swatted by the Germans. The Buzzer's legacy would be carried on by Swatto, whom we shall discuss later in the video. Man-Bot. Man-Bot is another character who has an even smaller role to play in that tiny scene that he appears in than the Buzzer. At least the Buzzer flew toward the Germans and contributed to the ambush. Man-Bot, meanwhile, just stands around in the background like an actual bot. He is the ultimate NPC during the entire affair. Wait, let me cancel that. At least NPCs have dialogue. Maybe they just forgot to program his speech box? Jokes aside, honestly, like most of his teammates, I couldn't really find that much about him while doing my research. He is the predecessor of Mind Droid, who is another supe that follows in his footsteps. Man-Bot dies in that German ambush as well. Guess being a bot didn't make him bulletproof. It's never really stated whether he was an actual human beneath the outfit, but if the fate of Mind Droid is anything to go by, I think this might explain his death by bullets better. Steel Knight. The muscle of the Avenging Squad, Steel Knight, was supposed to be the dude with the cool tech. We actually see him in action alongside Soldier Boy as they try and lift a Sherman battle tank to prove their strength to Mallory. Sadly for him, apparently his tech and muscles were no match for some good old German bullets, as he is shredded to pieces without even putting up a real fight. He would be succeeded in the future by Tech Knight in Vaught's second iteration of a hero group in the form of Payback. Steel Knight is seen as a bulky superhero who is covered from head to toe in armor. Personally, out of all the characters we have discussed so far, he has the best character design, in my opinion. Unfortunately, we don't actually get any details about his background, and he is there one moment and the next, he's dead. Ladio. You know, I have always felt that the sidekick community has been underrepresented in the Boys series. For some reason, most supes don't seem to care about taking in proteges, which I think might have something to do with their massive inflated egos, not wanting to share the spotlight. Which brings us to one of the most obvious sidekick parodies in the franchise, Ladio. Ladio in the source material is presented through Vaught's very sexualized sidekick branding, so I guess Vought really cared about their engagement metrics even back then. There is very little else about him that I could find in the comics, which is the focus of my video today, outside of the fact that one of his successors would become Tech Knight's sidekick. Ladio does appear in the TV universe as well as in this role, and he is seen wearing a full-body leather suit that looks straight out of an S&M shop. I think it's quite obvious that Ladio is supposed to be a parody of Robin, the Boy Wonder. I kinda find it strange that Garth Ennis never fully committed to exploring this character, considering the fact that he does have a lot of potential. Era 2, Payback, Modern Roster. Stormfront. It's time to finally move on to an actual heavy hitter who the show completely waters down. So allow me to introduce you to the real Stormfront in all his malevolent glory. Unlike the TV show where Stormfront is Clara Vought, Frederick Vaught's wife, the Stormfront in this comic is the result of the Germans' experiments with Compound V before Vogelbaum defected to the US. The Doctor had brought along Stormfront with him to the land of the free, despite the young boy having been already brainwashed by Nazi propaganda. Even though Vogelbaum urges the Americans to kill the young boy due to his extreme leanings, Vought refuses to do so and raises him up as one of their Supes, using him to do their dirty work, before eventually making him join Payback. Once an adult, Stormfront was made the leader of Payback, who, as I have already stated, were the second most popular superhero group behind the Seven. Now here is where things get really spicy in my opinion. In the TV show, we know that Soldier Boy's DNA was used to create Homelander, but in the comics it's actually Stormfront's genetic material that becomes a key foundation for Vaught's Homelander project, with Black Noir also tied into that genetic line. I mean, just look at Homelander's blonde hair and blue eyes. Doesn't it scream master race? These are things that he almost certainly inherited from his daddy Stormfront. I feel like the TV show has built up Soldier Boy to be everything that Stormfront is in the comics, except for the Nazi part. In the original source material, this Supe is able to fly and generate devastating lightning-like electrical blasts. He is also highly durable, super fast, and has super strength. His greatest superpower, though, was being sexually involved with Queen Maeve. Jokes aside, if I were to wager, he would actually be able to give Homelander a real rough time, considering his powers and experience. I believe Vaught's official story is that Stormfront is a reincarnated Viking, which is pretty dope for a backstory if you ask me. Tech Knight. Remember how I said that Steel Knight would eventually be replaced by his successor Tech Knight in Vaught's future iterations of their superheroes? I think it's worth noting that the man behind the Tech Knight moniker, Robert Vernon, is the third hero to inherit this mantle, even though his predecessors were both called Steel Knight. The change in name was apparently Vaught's attempt at rebranding the character, reasons I couldn't really find. Anyways, Tech Knight is actually the total opposite of Stormfront in my eyes. This is because unlike Stormfront, Tech Knight is just an ordinary human being behind the high-tech exoskeleton that he wears. Think of him as sort of an Iron Man of this franchise. However, unlike Iron Man, if you take away his suit, he isn't a billionaire, genius, or philanthropist. Tech Knight is actually a sexual deviant who is attracted to anything, whether it is organic or inorganic in nature. This leads him to almost rape his teammate Mind Droid, resulting in him getting publicly shamed and expelled from Payback. Outside of his weird sexual urges, Tech Knight is considered to be fairly normal and even harmless by Supe standards. Butcher considers him boring, and he is one of the few Supes that the boys don't directly go after. Throughout his career with Payback, he would attempt to join the Seven secretly behind his teammates' backs, not knowing that they were doing the same as well. Tech Knight's armored suit gives him flight and advanced combat capabilities, which actually makes him a legit threat if crossed. In the end, it is discovered that he has a tumor in his brain, which is diagnosed as being the cause for his sexual deviancy. I believe he is the only member of Payback who actually dies a hero's death while trying to save a woman and her baby from being crushed by a wheelbarrow. Although in his head, the wheelbarrow is a meteor, which he takes to outer space and destroys by humping it until it explodes. Make of that what you will. I really feel that it's unfortunate that Tech Knight doesn't play a much bigger role than he does. Swatto. As if having one lame bug-themed Supe was not enough for Vought, they decided to rebrand the mantle of the Buzzer into Swatto and continue pushing the character as a viable hero. I wish there was more to him than just being a winged bug-themed hero, but there really isn't. I guess there is the fact that the man can't speak in any language other than by making buzzing noises like an insect. The only way that anyone can understand him on Payback is thanks to Mind Droid translating his noises for the rest. We are introduced to him in a flashback to the time when Tech Knight almost raped Mind Droid, and we see him again during Payback's assault on the boys. He is shown to be a cowardly hero who is terrified when he discovers that Crimson Countess had been killed by Butcher. When Butcher finds him and his comrades, he disappears in the ensuing confusion caused by Stormfront's retreat and the conflict that follows. After Mind Droid and Soldier Boy go looking for him, they find him dead with a pickaxe impaled in his head. I understand there is only so much you can do with a hero like Swatto, but damn, they did him dirty. The guy was an absolute jobber who was just there to be used as a shock effect for the audience with his death. No wonder he was never accepted into the Seven. At least Tech Knight had his whole advanced armor going for him, despite being a pervert. Swatto, unfortunately, was swatted away just like his predecessor, the Buzzer. Mind Droid. Mind Droid is the next-generation superhero to succeed Manbot in the Payback era as a part of this secondary group of superheroes. While the public and many of the other Supes believe that Mind Droid is a robot, this is actually a ruse set up by Vought to promote the character as a mechanical superhero. In reality, Mind Droid is actually a regular human being behind an armored suit that makes him look like a robot. His claim to fame is that he is Crimson Countess's lover, but she is constantly cheating on him with other more powerful people like Stormfront and Victor Newman. I think that it's kinda sad that dating Crimson Countess is the highlight of this man's career, because outside of that, Mind Droid is just a low-level telepath who is able to probe into the minds of others at mere surface level. In my opinion, despite having such a cool premise for his character, they just made him a budget mind reader because outside of that, there is nothing much he can really do. It almost felt like to me that his sole purpose was to serve as a translator for Swatto, whom he can understand thanks to his telepathy. I can give props to the guy for at least being smart enough to realize just how out of depth he and his team were in their fight against the boys. When he discovers that Crimson Countess is dead, I don't know who was more terrified between him and Swatto. His terror only continues to get compounded when he finds Swatto dead as well. Unfortunately for him, he is caught by Butcher and literally decapitated while begging for his life. Out of all the Supes, Mind Droid is probably the least harmful in terms of his power, in my opinion. While I think his telepathy could prove useful in certain scenarios, he could not use telekinesis, nor could he glean accurate information from his target's minds. Mind Droid was also not powerful enough to mind control individuals or do something fatal, like switch off their brains. The guy was basically another jobber who was constantly henpecked by his partner and dreamed of joining the big leagues. I, for one, am surprised he even made it into Payback. Crimson Countess. Just like many of her counterparts in the Payback group, the Crimson Countess that I'm going to talk about next is a later holder of this title. In my opinion, she is presented as the femme fatale of the group, who will go to any lengths to defeat her enemies and advance through the superhero ranks. Despite being Mind Droid's lover, Crimson Countess is shown as a ruthlessly ambitious woman who isn't beyond using her body to achieve her goals of joining the Seven. She is portrayed as a vivacious and beautiful woman that has a similar costume and microwave-style power set to the wider Crimson Countess mantle. Remember the original origin story of the Crimson Countess that I told you about earlier? According to which, after fighting in the Second World War and defeating the Nazis, she had traveled back to her home dimension? Apparently, Vought had explained her presence in modern times by saying that she had returned once again, having sensed a growing rise in evil. I think we all know that this is not really the truth, because the original Countess had been killed by Germans in the ambush that I have already discussed before. This version of the Crimson Countess also has the ability to manipulate microwaves to create powerful thermal beams. She is also speculated to have the power of flight, even though I don't recall seeing her fly in the comics. Most of this speculation, I believe, comes from the fact that there are comic book covers where we see her in a flying motion. Unfortunately for her, she is the first casualty during Payback's attempt to kill the boys, as Butcher takes her out mercilessly. I think it is worth noting that unlike in the TV show, she has no romantic or sexual relationship with Soldier Boy in the comics. Eagle the Archer. The thing about trying to explore the character of Eagle the Archer from Payback is that by the time the events of the comics take place, he is already long dead. I mean, that doesn't change the fact that the guy was an absolute douchebag, from what little information there is out there about him. This Eagle the Archer was the third person to wear the costume and carries forward the same winged archer branding as the older Avenging Squad version, who managed to get shredded by the propeller of a friendly plane. We learned that Eagle had been a proper drug addict who had once beaten his girlfriend so severely that the girl had been put into a catatonic state. Vought had, however, covered his butt, using their PR teams to not ruin the image of their precious product. However, from what I recall, Butcher had gotten his hands on this information and had used it to blackmail Eagle into divulging all the information about the rest of Payback. This information would be used by Butcher to orchestrate his plans to take down the superhero group. I mean, you can say that despite not taking part actively in the story, Eagle is kind of responsible for the death of all his compatriots from Payback, so his impact is felt even after his demise. As for powers, he appears to carry the same basic winged archer concept as his predecessors, which is kind of the script with all these legendary heroes in Payback. Soldier Boy, Payback version. If you thought the original Soldier Boy was dumb, wait till I tell you about this guy who inherited his name. Considering that Soldier Boy had always been deemed the poster child for what being a real American means before Homelander's rise, I feel like throughout the comics he never embodies it even a single time. I mean, the guy is a total sniveling idiot who is so stupid that he doesn't even realize that he is being manipulated into having gay sex by Homelander. For some reason, he seems to think that this is Homelander's test to let him join the Seven. The great American hero is so thick that he is tricked by Homelander more than once in this way, I believe. Adding to his stupidity, he is an absolute coward, which is definitely a downgrade because while his predecessor was no less stupid, he was actually brave in his own way. This version of Soldier Boy doesn't hesitate to escape and run the moment he senses that the battle is being lost. As seen during Payback's ambush on the boys, the moment he sees that Swatto is dead, along with Crimson Countess and Stormfront has fled the scene, he too hightails it out of there. One of the cover arts literally shows him standing with his shield up even as he pees his pants. Soldier Boy is clearly written as a vicious parody of Captain America-style patriotic superhero branding, which is quite evident in how he is portrayed in the comics. Trust me, if you have only seen the shows so far, you will be shocked to see just how different this character is in the comics. In my opinion, these superheroes and their groups really add to the whole mythos of this series. It's really cool to see that even the Supes community is affected by the same issues that plague a corporate scene, with them betraying each other and doing whatever it takes to climb the ladder. These heroes also show not only just how morally bankrupt Vought and their creations are, but also how deep this corruption has actually spread its roots. I feel that the show does highlight this as well, but never to this degree. Tell me which of these superheroes did you find the most intriguing in the comments below. For now, though, it's time for me to say goodbye. I hope to see you soon on the next one. Until then, stay safe and stay marvelous.